At 0347 local time, North Korean patrol boats closed on the USS Destroyer with weapons visible. What happened next would demonstrate why the U.S. Navy does not retreat from Pacific provocations. North Korean patrol boats armed with P-15 Termit anti-ship missiles had closed to within engagement range, but what they faced was not the aging frigate their intelligence had expected. At exactly 0347, the destroyer's Combat Information Center confirmed the contact: 3 North Korean patrol boats closing from the port quarter, hull numbers masked, missile tubes uncovered. The ship's identification flashed across the electronic chart, identifying an Arleigh Burke-class Flight 2A, fully operational and carrying 96 Mark 41 vertical launch cells. The North Koreans, running in tight echelon, were built for intimidation, fast, low, and bristling with P-15 Termit launchers, a missile first fielded in the 1960s. Their doctrine called for a 3-on-1 swarm, betting that massed firepower and surprise could force a U.S. warship to break formation or exhaust its missile inventory. But this was not a Cold War relic. The destroyer's SPA-1DV radar had tracked the patrol boats from over 100 kilometers out, painting each hull and registering every radio transmission. At this range, the ship's rules of engagement allowed for a full defensive posture, fire control radars locked, electronic warfare suites active, and the Aegis system standing by to automate the kill chain. The North Koreans had entered the engagement envelope, but the imbalance was immediate and absolute. A single Burke-class destroyer fields more firepower and sensor coverage than the entire attacking group combined. Each P-15 missile carried by the patrol boats could reach 45 kilometers at best, flying low to evade radar, but the destroyer's layered defenses, including missile interceptors, electronic jamming, and the Phalanx CIWS, were built to counter precisely this kind of threat. In the space of seconds, the U.S. crew prepared for an attack their adversaries had rehearsed for decades, but with a technological edge that made the outcome all but certain. The moment the North Koreans pressed their advantage, the rules of naval warfare changed. This was not a contest of numbers, but of generations. Inside the Combat Information Center, the air is thick with anticipation. The CIC watch officer stands at the nerve center, eyes flicking from the SPY-1DV radar display to the Aegis console. The system is running at full combat readiness, tracking over 1,000 radar contacts across the Pacific battlespace, but the focus narrows to 3 North Korean patrol boats, missile tubes exposed, less than 40 kilometers out and closing fast. Every electronic emission is cataloged, every bearing updated in real time. The AN/SLQ-32V6 electronic warfare suite snaps to life, its digital receiver sweeping the spectrum for hostile radar signals. Within 3 seconds, the EW technician classifies the fire control emitters, Soviet-derived, P-15 Termit launch profile, frequency hopping, but decades behind the curve. The technician's gloved hand hovers above the jamming controls, ready to push a 200-kilowatt burst at the first sign of a missile seeker going active. Aegis is already running automated engagement authority. The protocol is absolute. If a high-probability inbound is detected, the system can launch interceptors without waiting for human confirmation. This is not a drill. Every second counts. The Mark 41 vertical launch cells stand loaded, 96 missiles at the ready, each cell mapped to a specific threat axis. The Combat Information Center officer confirms weapons-free status, but the real edge comes from the software. Aegis can assign up to 32 interceptors in a single cycle, tracking each missile's flight path, updating firing solutions in milliseconds. There is no shouting, no chaos, just the rapid, methodical exchange between man and machine. The EW tech calls out emitter types, the watch officer verifies threat classification, and the Aegis console displays a firing solution countdown. The destroyer's defense is not just hardware, but a seamless matrix of automation and human authority, compressing the detection to launch timeline to seconds. In this theater, the difference between survival and disaster is measured in milliseconds, and the crew is already operating at the threshold. At 0349, the destroyer's SPY-1DV radar cut through the darkness, locking onto a sharp low-altitude signature, an inbound missile sea skimming at barely 5 meters above the surface, closing from 45 kilometers out. The contact was not a ghost or a training drone. The radar return was dense, pulsed, and unmistakably hostile, a P-15 Termit, the Soviet-era anti-ship missile that North Korean doctrine still clings to. Within seconds, the Aegis system classified the threat profile subsonic, 300 meters per second, radar homing seeker, likely a 500-kilogram warhead. The missile's flight path hugged the ocean, exploiting the radar horizon and leaving only a thin margin for detection. The destroyer's electronic warfare suite, the ANSLQ-32V6, swept the spectrum, catching the missile's guidance frequency as it flickered between bands. The system's algorithms parsed out the emitter's signature, frequency hopping but decades behind the state-of-the-art. The EW console flashed a threat code, and the technician's hand hovered over the jamming controls, ready to push a 200-kilowatt burst the moment the missile seeker locked on, jamming. Aegis fed the track data into its engagement logic, assigning intercept priorities and calculating the missile's time to impact, under 2 minutes from first detection. The CIC watch officer confirmed the inbound classification, Termit, 45 kilometers, sea skimming, bearing 160. The destroyer's layered defense was already unfolding, VLS interceptors for mid-course, Phalanx, CIWS for terminal, and EW jamming as a wildcard, engagement. The physics of the threat were clear. At this altitude and speed, the missile would break the radar horizon with just seconds to spare. Human reflexes alone could never close the gap. Only automation, software, sensors, and fire control computers stood between a billion-dollar warship and a Cold War relic screaming over the waves. The clock was running. The Phalanx close in. Weapons system doesn't hesitate. As the inbound missile closes to 1,800 meters, the fire control computer calculates its course, speed, and altitude in less than a second. There is no time for debate, just a hard handoff from Aegis, a final check by the operator, and then the order, engage. The 20mm M61 Vulcan cannon spins up to 4,500 rounds per minute, a mechanical scream that drowns out every other sound in the CIC. The first burst lasts just under 2 seconds, about 150 tungsten rounds, each one traveling at over 1,000 meters per second. The entire engagement, from trigger to impact, takes less time than it takes to blink. The magazine holds 1,550 rounds, but doctrine calls for restraint. Each burst is short, surgical, and designed to maximize kill probability while preserving enough ammo for follow-on threats. In this engagement, the system fires a single sweep of 150 rounds, costing just $7,000, a fraction of what a single SM-2 missile would demand from the vertical launch cells. The cost-benefit is brutal and efficient. $7,000 to stop a $1 million threat. At 1,200 meters, the missile is shredded mid-air. The debris field fans out across the surface, trailing burning fragments and twisted metal. The Phalanx radar tracks the remains as they tumble into the sea, confirming a hard kill. There is no celebration, no pause, just a rapid cycling of the gun back to ready, sensors still hunting for the next inbound. The destroyer's last line of defense has done its job, and the magazine is barely scratched. In a scenario built on the hope of overwhelming American defenses, the reality is a 1,550-round drum and a system that can repeat this response 10 more times before needing a reload. The gap between Cold War doctrine and modern warfighting is measured in milliseconds, steel, and the cold logic of automated firepower. The myth of a North Korean missile swarm collapses under scrutiny. Open-source vessel counts and satellite imagery from the last 2 years show no evidence of a 39-boat guided missile armada. The hard numbers are that fewer than a dozen patrol craft still mount operational P-15 Termit launchers. Most of the so-called missile boats serve as decoys or coastal pickets, stripped of heavy ordnance, their launch rails empty or loaded with training rounds. Even at full strength, the attacking group in this scenario could muster at most 6 to 8 live missiles, nowhere near the saturation threshold needed to overwhelm a modern United States destroyer's layered defense. The North Korean doctrine of massed coastal harassment, shaped by Soviet playbooks from the 1970s, fails against a ship that can track, classify, and engage every inbound with automation and precision. The moment the first missile is shredded, the reality sets in. This is not a war of numbers. It's a contest between outdated hardware and a fleet built for networked, distributed firepower. The cost of miscalculation is immediate and absolute. A 2-second burst from the phalanx costs $7,000. The SM-2 interceptor, the next missile up the chain, runs $1.5 million per shot. That is a 200-to-1 difference for a single engagement. The economics are ruthless. The destroyer's magazine holds 1,550 rounds, enough for 10 more bursts before even thinking about a reload. North Korean planners gamble on forcing the United States to waste high-value missiles against low-tech threats, but the numbers do not add up. Every time a $7,000 burst wipes out a $1 million missile, the burden shifts back to the attacker. Across the Pacific, regional observers watch the math play out. The United States Navy counts 290 commissioned warships. China claims 331, but classification standards blur the picture. What matters is not just hulls, but how each engagement ripples through the fleet. When a single destroyer can neutralize a missile swarm at pocket change prices, the message is clear. The cost of challenging this layered defense is paid in wasted ordnance and lost credibility. Would you trust a 2-second, $7,000 burst to defend a billion-dollar warship? The United States Navy already does. Tonight, one $7,000 phalanx burst erased a decades-old threat, proof that layered defense and automation now outpace outdated doctrine and desperation. The Pacific remains a live-fire chessboard, not a propaganda stage. For every adversary watching, the cost of miscalculation just doubled. Would you trust the math? Drop your thoughts below.